Hello, everybody, and thanks for joining us here at the Detailers Forum. This is our inaugural video, just a little bit of an introduction, telling about what we want to talk about, what our hopes are, some of the stuff that we'll go over in the future, and a little bit about myself and where I come from. I've been a detailer now for about 17 years. I started detailing right out of high school. I got my start because my father was a steel erector and fabricator. He worked in a shop. I had a lot of experience with computers, and they were working on a computer software that was not working. It was a detailing software went by the name of Fabricad. Now, some kind of old hand computer detailers might remember Fabricad was this great DOS detailing program, really kind of ahead of its time, but it didn't make the port into Windows very well. So when they programmed it to get into the Windows environment, for whatever reason, the programming didn't go well, and so it was crashing all the time. And they knew that I was big into computers. They brought me in. I worked for them a little bit while, tried to get this software running. Those of you who use FabSuite, the guy who runs FabSuite, Bill Isler, actually was the same guy who owned Fabricad. So we talked a little bit, and we still kind of talk to this day. We bought a couple copies of FabSuite for a detailing company, and it was kind of fun talking about the history of that old Fabricad and where he's come from that. But yeah, that's how I got my start. Kind of like everybody else, I never made a deliberate choice to be a detailer. That's kind of a big trend with people, is they kind of walked into it. Maybe they started in a drawing room. They started by making copies or running blueprints, or maybe they started sketching with filler beams. And that was kind of my story. I started, actually, believe it or not, I started back in 2001, and I used a pencil at the time. The guy that I learned from was an old school detailer, and as much as he wanted to teach me, he had no interest in anything AutoCAD. Any time that we used AutoCAD, any of the learning processes that went with that, you get very frustrated at. So if the drawings didn't come out looking like a pencil drawing, which, because I had no actual training in AutoCAD, was not the case right off the bat, he would just, nope, we're just not doing that, which a lot of people do. Whenever there's a challenge with technology, whenever it doesn't work right off the bat, they abandon it. They just, nope, this isn't good, this doesn't work, and they're off. So that was kind of his thing, and eventually I pushed the issue forward. I got into AutoCAD, but I wasn't really skilled at it. I'd never been trained, so we kept looking for other software solutions. Eventually, we tried a program that was released by a company called Steel Plus Networks. It was kind of like a partnership with Can-Am, where they were trying to form some type of collaboration, some type of purchasing group. And they released this software. It actually ran on Macintosh, which was the first strike against it for me. And it never really came together. It started okay, it would detail a beam and a column and that type of thing, but there wasn't really a robust interface there. So we used that, kind of struggled through it for maybe a year, which was an extremely frustrating year. A lot of tension, because the drawings just weren't coming out the way that we wanted to. You had to use this AutoCAD program to add all of the trim, all of the other stuff. Anything that was outside of a shear tab or a clip angle was just outside of its realm of ability. So we ended up having to go into this program called PowerCAD, which was like a paper space AutoCAD. Nothing, it didn't scale properly. It was a disaster. But eventually I got my way into SDS2. I learned, SDS2 in and out. I started programming parametrics back in 6.3 when parametrics were very kind of new. That's kind of my history, and I've always thrown myself into technology, trying to embrace what's new, and that's kind of the reason that I'm doing this. I've seen a lot of people are using YouTube as a way to teach, a way to learn, and there's a real lack of that in the detailing community. For years, the leader there has been, there's a forum called the Steel Detail Group on Yahoo, which is great. I really suggest you check it out. But it has kind of faded into a lot more of the old school detailers, a lot more people who are still using AutoCAD or kind of out-of-date software. But it was a great source of information, and there's still actually a lot of great information to be had there. If you need to know some nuance of the code, some idiosyncrasy of bolts or something like that, there's a lot of information to be had there. So that's kind of what I did. when I started detailing, the guy that I learned from, his name was Chandran. He was an Indian guy, dots not feathers, and he had this kind of opinion of he would tell me, this is the way you do it. You always do this. We use lowercase piece marks for these things and uppercase for these things, but he would never explain the why behind it. And I always wanted to know that why, so that when he left, when I continued on my own, I would have that information. I would understand what's the purpose behind this. Why do we dimension the things from the end of the clip angle, or why are stub dimensions shown at the end of the material, and all that stuff. When you start, you're just told to do it, and you don't really know why. As you grow, as you take questions from the shop, or like I did, if you actually go out into the shop and lay things out, you'll start to understand more and more why those things come. But if you don't ask those questions, or if you don't have somebody willing to teach you in a manner that's, don't just give me the answer, but give me the reason behind the answer, then you're really going to struggle. Not today and maybe not tomorrow, but eventually you're just not going to continue to improve because you don't have that thought in mind. So I spent a lot of time kind of digging through the codes, reading the AISC manuals, trying to figure out the ins and outs of why everything is done the way it is. And I'm hoping that through this channel, through continuing to educate people, and a lot of this knowledge I don't have myself, but I'm hoping to reach out to talk to other people who do have that knowledge, whether it be people who use Tekla, people from the AISC, bolt suppliers, whoever else, who can give us some more in-depth knowledge than a lot of us really possess. Then, by sharing, by collaborating, we can really move the product of steel forward. And that's the overall goal. Is I want people to choose steel for their buildings, and that really needs to be all of our goals. We need to work harder, I think, to find ways to make buildings go up, make them go up on time, make them go up correctly. We want people to think of steel as the product that makes your building go better. And if we can educate ourselves, if we can make ourselves, members of the team, when there's a question about a building, if we're looking for not just, hey, can you guys give us this answer, but trying to provide them with an answer that works and say, here you go, here's the best answer to this question, I believe, based on the information available. Is that okay? And it helps both of us, if we behave that way. If we behave like, our job is to move this project forward, instead of finding reasons that we can throw our hands up and say, hey, I can't work on these drawings anymore. Now, obviously, there are exceptions. Some contract drawings, I should say, a lot of contract drawings are so far gone, they're so incomplete, they're so, contradictory, that you just need to push back a little bit and say, hey, guys, we got to finish these designs before I can really work on this. Because otherwise, you just end up throwing money away. You end up detailing it and then redetailing it when they redesign it. You charge your customer, the customer charges the owner, and then the owner's paying for the same work twice. So obviously, with all of these things, there's two sides of it. But we really do want to make ourselves part of the team to push these projects forward. So that's kind of a history of where I come from. I'm hoping that can talk about a lot of the stuff that we face, not only as detailers, but as fabricators, engineers, software providers, getting their perspectives a little bit, because software today is one of the tools that we use most frequently, and it can be such a frustrating experience for us, especially if we don't understand the challenges that programmers face or look at things from their perspective. A lot of times these programmers are brought in and they are a programmer first, and they do not understand steel detailing. They don't know how it works. They don't know how it's supposed to work. And if we can help them, if we can communicate with them in a more productive way, other than just complaining a lot, which I know I tend to do, I think we can all make it a little bit further. So I'm really looking forward to that process. We'll talk about how to check drawings in the modern age. How much do you use the modeling software? How much do you check the drawings? What's those trade-offs for, hey, maybe I don't need to check these stub dimensions. The software 99.9% of the time is spitting out the proper stub dimension, so let me just check those work point dimensions. Or, let me check to make sure this beam looks good. I don't need to go in and calculate the code manually. I can go into that model, take a look, and say, okay, yes, this clears, those dimensions look about right, and that's good enough. We don't need to be wasting the time. Spending time checking is fantastic, but you need to spend it in a smart way. But more on that later. We'll talk a little bit about modern detailing workflow. Do you give your project to a guy and say, okay, you go, here's the contract drawings, go and produce these drawings and let me know when you're done? Or do you break it up? Do you break it up into smaller steps of, here, you do this preliminary model, you go ahead and you do connections, you do sub-material, you do what I call gingerbread, all the trim angles, fascia angles, hung lintels, all that stuff. And then you have another guy who scrubs plans and then another guy who scrubs details. Or somewhere in between where you've got a guy who's in charge of the model and a guy who's in charge of the details and the plans. That's what we do, is we break it up that way. We'll talk a little bit about how to spot bad detailers or bad relationships with detailers. What are some of the warning signs? If you're a fabricator or if you're a detailer and you've subbed out work, what are some of the things that a subcontract detailer can say to you that makes you go, whoa, this is starting to take a bad turn? We've all kind of faced those problems. Working for a fab shop as a project manager, as an estimator, spent a lot of time dealing with subcontract detailers, and the bad ones all tend to fall into the same patterns. So we'll talk a little bit about that. We'll talk about weeding out bad customers. If you're a detailer, what are some of the signs that you can see to warn you off of a customer? When should you pull the plug on a project and say, listen, I can't do this anymore, try and cut your losses? When should you get more aggressive about being paid? When should you consider putting liens on projects? And how do you do that? We'll talk about some of that stuff. We'll talk about technology. What computer should I be building? What kind of monitor should I have? Keyboards, mice, software. What are all these little things that can make my job better? Talk about Logitech gaming mice and gaming keyboards and how to program those macros, and what are some of the little software tools that you use to make your job easier as a detailer. Do you still use a physical calculator? Do you use a calculator emulator? Some people love their spreadsheets. They've got those all set up to calculate. Do you have little programs that you use, little scripts that you make to make your day easier? And what are they? If you're an AutoCAD detailer, do you use dynamic blocks? If you're an SDS detailer, are you using the right parametrics? If you're a Tekla detailer, do you have the right, I can't remember the word for the Tekla thing. So we'll talk about too, maybe what's the right software choice for you? Do you want to be a 3D detailer? Is that the way that you're going? Or do you want to stick in the 2D realm? Or maybe you're a little worried about getting into one of the big software packages. Maybe you're thinking about that kind of middle of the road AutoCAD package where it's a 3D detailing package, but it gives you that comfort of AutoCAD as well. And you can use it depending on what you want to do. You can use a little bit of it, you can use a lot of it. So you can skip that kind of dead period that you have to face when you're learning a whole new software package. So there's advantages to both of those. I'm new to the whole video concept, YouTube. I've learned everything I possibly can from watching my son's gaming YouTube videos. If you have comments, if you want to see something different, if you want us to change the way we're doing things, or maybe change the format, or if there's things that you want to hear about, let us know down in the comments. We'll try and get as much information to you in the most entertaining fashion possible. We're going to do a couple different segments. Some are going to be very informative. Some are going to be a little bit more casual. Just talk between detailers about the things that are unique to detailing. Some of the funny stories, shop calls from field foremans who didn't know the difference between a TC bolt and a standard bolt, and all of these different funny things that we've run into across our career. So some of that I hope you find entertaining. A lot of it I hope that you find informative, and I hope that generally we can use this channel to improve the product of steel, improve ourselves and our career's future. So I learned everything from my children's YouTube videos. At the end of every one of those videos, they seem to say, hit the like buttons and subscribe buttons. Apparently that's important. So if you have a chance, go ahead and do that. It'll make sure that you get more information, the rest of our videos as they come out, and that we can continue to do this together. That's it for now.